Let's get right to the latest as coaching vacancies continue to be filled, but we're going to go to Tennessee, where the Titans have hired Brian Callahan to be their head coach. He's the former Bengals OC, has worked with Joe Burrow, of course, Matthew Stafford, and Peyton Manning, just to name a few. So let's bring in Dan Graziano, our ESPN NFL insider. Dan, what do we know about why the Titans decided to go with Callahan?
Well, Laura, I think there's a lot to like about Brian Callahan, and the Titans weren't the only team that felt that way. You know, he doesn't call plays in Cincinnati, but he does have a lot of responsibility there in terms of game plan installation and other administrative aspects of the offense. And I think it caught a lot of teams' attention how well Cincinnati played with the backup quarterback, Jake Browning, after Joe Burrow got hurt. Browning was in Cincinnati's system for 3 years, and Callahan had a significant role in his development as a backup to the point where he was able to play competent football as a starter. And I think teams liked that. He was going to be a popular candidate. After interviewing in person in Nashville yesterday, he was supposed to get on a plane and fly to Carolina and interview with David Tepper today, and then fly to Atlanta and interview with Arthur Blank tomorrow. The Titans decided they didn't want that to happen, so they moved quickly to get to an agreement with him last night after his interview there.
Yeah, sometimes when somebody's in demand, you better just lock them up and keep on moving. All right, so a big reason that Callahan got this job was because of how he coached up Jake Browning, of course. You heard Graz mentioning that after he took over for an injured Joe Burrow. Overall, Browning put up better numbers than Burrow this season. Now, Burrow was dealing with a calf injury, but the Bengals scored more points per game when Browning started. Plus, he had a better completion percentage, yards per attempt, and a total QBR than Burrow. And Dan, you actually spent some time with him, Callahan, when you were both in Detroit. Why do you think he'd be a good fit with a second-year quarterback in Will Levis?
Yeah, a lot to like. Number one, I would be interested, is his dad coming with him. His dad is one of the great offensive line coaches in the history of the NFL. But to your point, I was with him in Detroit. I love the fact that he's been around a bunch of different offenses. So often offensive coordinators, they come and they only know that one system. I was with him in Detroit. We did a little bit of like the no-huddle indie stuff. He obviously knows the Shanahan tree because, again, his father has such a rich history in it, and his father is a part of it in Cleveland. And also what he did this year with Joe Burrow and then Jake Browning, that's the spread, a little bit RPO-centric with Zach Taylor. So I love the fact that he's been around a bunch of different places that were, you know, you needed different styles of offenses to play well with certain quarterbacks. And I think the greatest quality he has is he's a great listener. He is tremendous when it comes to listening to guys of this is what I like, this is what I see well, this is what I understand well, and then those adjustments of, hey, this is what they're doing. Maybe we can get to something like that when it comes to the in-game stuff. So there's a lot to like about the hire.
Yeah, I mean, the two biggest jobs for the Tennessee Titans this offseason: improve the offensive line, but also ultimately, you know, not expecting them to go from being one of the worst in the NFL to one of the best. You need to call an offense that's optimized around having potentially some struggles there, which Callahan, a little before he slip there, has experience doing in Cincinnati. And then you got to obviously develop the quarterback and call an offense around him. And to Dan's point about what we saw with Jake Browning, I was really impressed by a couple things. Jake Browning as a prospect, personally, I did not think would be able to play at the level we saw in the NFL. So I think Callahan no doubt deserves a ton of credit for that. And then the way they changed that offense when Joe Burrow went out. With Joe Burrow, this is an offense that puts a ton on the shoulders of the quarterback. Essentially, they put him in the gun, spread things out, and ask him to let it cook. If they had taken that approach with Jake Browning, there's no way this offense would have been as efficient. But they made a bunch of changes when the quarterback change happened. More RPOs, more under center boots. That ball was coming out very quick. And I was very impressed by what I saw.
It's a direct tie-in to what you and Dan just said, MK. Now it gets to the point of personnel, because the one thing we can all acknowledge about the Cincinnati Bengals is they had phenomenal guys in very important spots. When you think about Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd and Joe Mixon in the backfield, I love Spears, the young running back in Tennessee, not because he has my last name, because he played well. But what are you going to do with Derrick Henry, that type of bruising? Do you need a back like that in the system that Callahan will bring? The other part is on the outside. You know, obviously we know DeAndre was brought on. We think about this team, and if you want to be explosive, they are going to have to go out and try to make some moves or identify some guys in the draft if he wants to be as explosive. And to y'all point about what they did with Jake Browning, you have a more athletic guy in Will Levis. So to me, offensively, you probably have more dimensions that you can add on both sides if you're Brian Callahan. But to me, it's about him and Rand Carthon identifying how to get this team immediately better from a personnel standpoint moving forward.
Yeah, don't forget, Rand Carthon was a part of San Francisco. We know what the support staff is when it comes to helping the quarterback out there. So that will be now the next step is who is he going to bring with his quarterback coach? And then also, how do they support Will Levis when it comes to the talent around?
Yeah, a reminder, too, that when Tennessee said they wanted to make a change here, it was because they didn't feel they were on the same page with Vrabel, and they wanted to be on the same page with Carthon. So I think it all wraps in together and makes a ton of sense about their future. Okay, the Eagles started 10-1 and were tied with the 49ers for third in scoring through Week 12. But Philly averaged just 20.5 points per game in the final 6 weeks of the season, which was tied with the Jaguars for 29th. The defense struggled all season. They ranked 30th in scoring defense. Coordinator Sean Desai was demoted after Week 13 in favor of Matt Patricia, but things actually got worse. So Philadelphia opted to fire Desai on Sunday night and fired offensive coordinator Brian Johnson earlier today. Let's get Dan Graziano back in here, our NFL insider. Dan, both coordinators now out in Philly. What's next for head coach Nick Sirianni?
Well, a search, but it's a search that's already sort of begun. I think Nick Sirianni and the GM Howie Roseman wanted to go into the postseason meeting with team owner Jeffrey Lurie with a list of candidates. Here are the kinds of guys we think we can get that we'd like to bring in, and here's why we think they would work. So they'll work through those lists. Look, I mean, a lot of teams are out there looking for coordinators. They'll have competition if they want to bring in one of the bigger name guys, you know, like a Wink Martindale that was let go in New York. And on offense, it's probably going to be somebody that's going to be okay with, you know, running and installing Nick Sirianni's offense. Even if they're going to be the play caller, you would probably think it as somebody who has a prior connection to him, who's worked with him and had success with him. So they'll get going in earnest on this and start bringing in guys in the coming days. But it's a process that's already underway.
Yeah, you know, we all wondered what would happen with Sirianni, thanks to Graz for the latest there. And Marcus, we've seen that he's been able to hold his spot, but change seemed inevitable. So why do you think this week we're finally seeing a lot of this happen?
Oh, my goodness.
What?
Yeah, I think culturally, when you watch this team, obviously it was so different than our idea of the Philadelphia Eagles that went to the Super Bowl. It seemed like a tight-knit group. It seemed like a very confident group. And this absolutely could play into why this team looked so dejected and uninterested as the season went along. They lost Shane Steichen and Gannon. Both of those guys took head coaching jobs. It could have been a disbelief in what their offensive and defensive coordinators were telling them. And I'm telling you, as the season goes along, when you realize that your plans are not working out and you don't feel good about how you're going into games, it starts to rumble throughout the locker room. And guys start talking about if they're in the best position possible. You start seeing sideline interactions that are not favorable. So it could have stemmed from the offensive coordinators and not believing in the plan. But something happened with this football team psychologically down the stretch, and they need to get it figured out. And it's tasked to Nick Sirianni to get it fixed fast.
Yeah, no doubt. The body language that we could see publicly on the sideline was one thing. You wonder behind the scenes what it was even like. As we spin ahead to the offseason, though, Mina, where should the focus be?
Everything they do this offseason, coordinator hire most notably, has to be centered around Jalen Hurts. How do you get him to see the blitz well, to handle that well, to throw over the middle of the field? And then I think they need to have a really honest conversation. They need to self-scout whether or not, as a runner, he can return to the form we saw in 2022. I mean, across the board, the numbers of him on design carries are down, especially if you take out quarterback sneaks, going from 0.35 EPA per play to 0.07. It used to be like a devastating play when Jalen Hurts carried the football. Now it wasn't at all. This season it wasn't. And that affected everything that they did. So much of what made this offense successful in 2022 was predicated on them having a numbers advantage or an equalizer because he was a threat to carry the football, even when he didn't, the kind of coverages they face. We talked about this early in the season when we first noticed that they were seeing more split safety and less single high. It was because defenses didn't fear Hurts as much as a runner. I don't know why he ran less effectively this year. I don't know if it was because of injury or it was because of him simply not wanting to run. I don't know, but they need to answer that question because it should and will, I think, impact what kind of offense they call in 2024.
I feel like ever since the season got done, every time I talk about the Eagles, it feels like I'm talking about the Cowboys. And I'm not saying that as a joke or to be hyperbolic. Comfort. That's why I made that sound when they said, well, when Graz's report of, well, someone that's comfortable running Sirianni's system. If you're running an offensive system in the NFL and it doesn't have multiple personnel groups, multiple formations, the ability to change motion and play action, you're behind. It's not 2016 anymore. It's 2024. And Sirianni's system, at least from what we saw this year, doesn't major in that stuff. That hurts this football team. Before we could ever talk about like what's got to have to change, what's not going to change. Is Jason Kelce definitely gone? Why didn't this offensive line perform nearly as well this year as it did last year? Mina's right. He didn't run nearly as effective. They didn't change the line of scrimmage nearly as much. But it was also because they stood there. And so I think that sitting here and thinking, I'm just going to hire somebody to call plays from the system that I want, you are behind, man, and teams are going to catch up when it comes to this league.